bet there. When someone pairs their door card before 6th Street, you should fold in all likelihood, unless you have a very strong hand. Because the pot is usually relatively small, and you're drawing relatively thin to trips, which is their most likely hand. So, but if you have something and they don't pair the door card till 6th Street, then you usually just have to pay it off. But it's pretty mandatory if they pair it on 4th Street that you just fold any one pair hand or less. Like I said, you don't get penalized. The ante structure at these stakes is not huge. It doesn't really get big until you get up to like 2040. And actually, I think in the 7 game it's relatively low anyway. So the point is, you can play pretty tight, even shorthanded, and not pay a huge price. Meaning, you're not really playing 3 rag cards. You can call when someone completes the bring-in if you have 2 overcards to their up card, even if your hand is like otherwise trash. But also, small cards in this game aren't really valuable. So like 3, 4, 5 should still fold when a jack raises, because it's just a three straight is not a good enough hand to go anywhere heads up with small cards. What you want are medium and big cards that can win multiple ways by making straights or flushes, but also by just pairing and maybe making 2 medium pair by the end or something like that. This would be like a marginal call if he raises here with a 4. I have 2 overcards and a 2 flush to his 4. And luckily, he still should raise all the time. And luckily for me, he's just giving up quite a bit. And you notice there's just not a lot of action, so I'm sitting here playing 3-6. I don't think I would feel comfortable playing like 15-30 stud against a stud specialist, but certainly I would play 5-10 or 8-16 or whatever they have. But it's just not running very often, so this is what we're playing. And I think at these stakes, people are probably playing pretty weak. So I will run over him to an extent once I see he's giving up so easily on his steals and things like that. What else can I say? You can sort of apply your knowledge of drawing hands and hold them to stud on 4th and 5th Street. On 5th Street you have 2 cards to come, so it's sort of analogous to the flop in Hold'em. So if you have a 4 flush, you're only about a 2-to-1 dog to make it by the end. Same thing with a straight. Obviously, if you make it on, if you have a 4 flush or a 4 straight on 4th Street, you have 3 cards to come. So you're usually about 50% to make it by the river. And things like a pair and a 4 flush on 5th Street are very, very strong drawing hands. And you can use the fact that you have a lot of equity in that spot against almost anything reasonable to set up a possible just get the ball rolling on a semi-bluff and potentially win the hand later down the road. So if you in stud, it's definitely a game of betting scare cards. So it's important that you do raise in spots when you early in hands when you develop some drawing potential, and it probably doesn't cost you much if you're raising with the worst hand, because by catching scare cards later after you showed strength, you can take down a pot that you really have no business winning. Like you raise when a 3 comes up and you have 4 diamonds, but you might have 2 pair from your opponent's perspective, and then later you make open 3s, you pair your 3, he may fold one pair, fearing that he's already up against two pair, or even that he's already up against a full house if you had some pair with threes. So you can get people to make laydowns, especially when they're not that experienced at stud, but they're decent hand readers. And that's something worth keeping in mind. Basically, with aggression being the rule rather than the exception in these games, even when people don't really know what they're doing, you often lose your ability to bluff if you, later in a hand, if you don't raise early to set it up. So, for example, a lot of opponents just won't put you on a flush when the third diamond hits if you didn't raise on 4th Street when you had 2 diamonds up. That's a good way to trap people when you do have the flush, is by mixing in some non-aggressive plays in spots where when you pick up your 4 flush, for example. But if you want to bluff, you ordinarily need to have raised earlier on to get credit when you're trying to that you've completed a draw. Okay, so on we go to stud 8 or better. This hand, I think I've got a probable pair of jacks that played pretty strong against me, and I had a good starting hand. I pick up some various draws against it and decide to look him up, and he's playing ace king jack or king queen jack to start the game off. And this is an example of a mistake you might see. People who play stud know that 3 Broadway cards are good starting hands, but in stud 8 or better, they are no good. 3 card straight flushes are strong. So if you had like ace king queen of hearts, that would be a strong hand, but definitely not ace king jack, especially when he's facing an 8 or lower. It's going to be very hard for him to show a profit with a hand like that with no pair, because for one thing, the low hand is really in charge in this game when it improves on 4th Street. If you start with 4 cards to a low and you're up against just like a probable 1 high pair, you are in the driver's seat. It's very close equity-wise, but your opponent doesn't know when you have completed your low, when you've made a pair, and as soon as, of course, if you lock up the low half of the pot and he's going high, obviously, then he's in terrible shape since you're just free rolling on all the rest of the money. Here again, he makes a strange raise when he has 9-8. He can't have a 4 low. I guess he could be rolled up somehow or something. I have a very strong hand. Pair and a 4 flush and a 3 low. I make aces up on the river or on 6th Street, and he's just basically a very aggressive and poor player. And again, we're only playing 5-10, but it is just a stud 8 table, so I normally expect people sitting alone at heads-up tables in less popular games to know their game pretty well, and 8s and 9s is not a spot to jam it up there against the board that I was showing. So that's good. If I gotta play someone who I have an edge on heads up, I prefer them to be the type of player to give action, actually. It makes it more fun. Here, I probably have the best hand on 4th Street, but he's showing a very powerful board, and I have to tread carefully. When he makes a 3 card straight and low on board, and I also have a 5 and 6 in my hand,